Greetings, YouTube. Um, who are neurodivergent can, on occasion, have what is known as a meltdown. It's essentially when you become so overwhelmed by whatever it is that is your particular trigger or your particular uh, issue that with the world finally gets to a breaking point. The pressure just gets too great that you can't take it anymore, and you just fall apart. And it's expressed in many different ways. There is no one stereotypical meltdown. There is no one stereotypical trigger, um, and everyone is going to manifest it differently. Um, when I have them, I have always been completely alone. I didn't really understand what they were. Now I do, and I have manifested them in a number of different ways over the years. I have self-harmed because of just the absolute feelings were so goddamn big. They were just It wasn't healthy. Let's put it that way. And I've gone catatonic when I just suddenly my brain is just like, "Yeah, dunk," and then that's it. But everybody does it in different ways. But there's one thing to keep in mind, that a tantrum and a meltdown are not the same thing. Even if they look very similar, if the person who is melting down is doing it in a vocal, visual display. So it is very obvious that they are in emotional distress, that they are expressing it in crying or loud voice or agitation, any different, again, there's many different ways to manifest a meltdown. But that's not a tantrum. You see, a meltdown is something you have no goddamn control over. You are overwhelmed. Your cup is full and it is now overflowing and you do not know what to do with that. Meltdown. A tantrum is an intentional act. It is an act of emotional manipulation. Also sometimes using guilt or embarrassment. So if somebody throws a tantrum in public and they know that that public display is going to shame the person that they are trying to manipulate, that's an effective tactic of getting their will. So a tantrum is a means of controlling another person, whereas a meltdown is when you are just can't anymore. You just you just can't. And you don't know what to do with it. And so things go bad. Um, Now, mine have always been in private because my masking was so strong that I essentially wasn't aware I was masking. And it wasn't until I began to really pull apart my problems in my life after having gone to lots of therapy, getting on antidepressants, realizing I have executive dysfunction going on. It's not quite ADHD. I don't know if there's a name for it. It's probably related to my emotional state, my psychologist said. But it's it's an executive dysfunction issue. And then being diagnosed as autism, with autism, um, it all began to I began to pull it apart, and I realized, well, all those times in the past when you felt completely and absolutely overwhelmed, and you sometimes displayed overt, displays of anger or frustration, and it wasn't aimed at anyone or anything. There was this nebulous, yeah, and then you didn't know what to do about it. Well, those were meltdowns. I didn't know what they were. Now I do. But I had to do them in private because all of my masking focused on that. I was raised by an abusive alcoholic, displaying any kind of variance from what he wanted. And of course, what he wanted varied from second to second because he was an alcoholic. Alcoholics do not make sense. Children are looking for patterns. There are no goddamn patterns to alcoholics. So you were in a constant state of being confused. Throw into that you are suffering from other mental illnesses and you are autistic and you have executive dysfunctions. I was in a very bad state all the time. And one of the ways I preserved myself was by putting a mask up that was so goddamn thick it was a vault door. And now that I'm beginning to unpack things and realizing how much I spent of my life doing that, to the extent is I don't know who I am. I don't know who James was of the past. I don't know who I would have been if it weren't for the masking, if it weren't for all the things I had to do to survive. A lot of uh, autistic people have a really difficult time with lying. I am not one of them. Why? Because lying kept me alive. I got very good at lying and doing it fast and doing it consistently and remembering the lies and building on them, creating a fiction, creating a mask. But sometimes even I couldn't take it. Sometimes I'd have a meltdown. And a meltdown and a tantrum are not the same. Don't confuse them, and don't look at a person you know who is autistic who's having a meltdown and thinking they're doing it deliberately trying to manipulate you. They're not. They're doing it because they are overwhelmed. Yeah, so be kind to them. Be aware that they are living an experience, if you are holistic, that you do not understand and never will understand. You will never grasp the feeling of what that is like. Just like I will never understand how you can come out of the gate and understand the world around you in a way that still mystifies me.